So our purpose today is to be here to talk about your questions. So, we heard from a lot of you broad categories of questions around recruitment. How do we find youth? How do we get them to be more active in our activities? And where do we find these youth volunteers? And then we also kind of had questions that were focused on engagement or retention. We've got them now, how do we keep them involved? How do we move their involvement from maybe just showing up once in a while to being a more engaged volunteer? And then how do we keep them engaged when we have a small or non-existent budget to keep them engaged? Then we also had a few questions that talked about how is it that we organize or structure youth engagement in our coalitions. So, are we just having kids show up to meetings? Are they leading meetings? Are they leading activities? Are they a standalone committee? Are they a subcommittee? So, there's lots of different questions and things that we're curious about around how do we organize best to get our youth really engaged. What are the models that are really successful in keeping youth engaged? And we'll also try to share some resources that we have around training. So, helping to develop leadership training in our youth beyond maybe just a few things that we may have heard of already through CADCA, and we'll talk about some ways that we can use training resources to drive recruitment, retention, and engagement. So that's kind of the broad categories that I want to share today. And what I'm going to do in terms of how we organize this coffee conversation, and I do have my coffee here, so I will be taking sips of it as we go along. I want to make sure that we really hear your voices as well. So my plan is to present some ideas and then open it up to really have you all chime in, share what's worked really well for you or what further questions you might have. And I know that there are folks in here who may be able to answer other questions that other coalition leaders have. So let's tap into the wisdom of the room. I did send out some of the questions yesterday, so you could have a little bit of time to think about how you might respond to some of those or some examples that you might want to share. So let's dive into the first kind of broad category of youth engagement, and that was recruiting. So we talked, what are some recruiting best practices for inviting youth into your coalition work? And as we were talking about this here before this presentation, the first thing that really came up for us that I want to highlight for everybody in this conversation is cultural competence. So what I mean by that is, do you have people who are working with teenagers who kind of get teenagers, who think of them as potential partners in the work rather than as problems to be solved? So, you want to make sure that you understand where the teens are coming from so you can meet them where they're at. Ultimately, we are talking about doing some development work and helping our youth develop skills, that they may not have had before. But we do have to start with a firm belief that they're fully capable of doing the important work that we're inviting them to do. So I think it's really important to start off with just asking ourselves, how culturally competent are we to work with youth? Do we understand their concerns and their perspective? And if not, how can we learn more about that so that we're ready to meet them where they are? This is a real partnership. This is a chance to actually help youth address the real issues in the community that they live in and that they experience as well. So we want to make sure that we are treating them as equal partners. And then after that, then we can talk about some ways to recruit teens and young persons into our coalition work. So the first thing, this is true of really every volunteer ask that you ever do. The most effective way to have somebody join in what you're doing is a direct ask. Most people who volunteer for something will tell you the reason that they are involved is because somebody specifically asked them to do that. And it's really helpful too if you can speak to something that would be an individual talent or gift that that person has. So, you know, if you've seen a teenager who was a great public speaker in another setting, you might want to invite them to come and be involved in your work and sharing their skills as a public speaker. So that way, you know, it really makes sure that we're not just putting warm bodies into roles, but we're asking people to do things that they have a kind of a specific talent to do. And then another way is to really vary your methods. So, you know, make sure you're using a variety of ways of describing the opportunities for service that there are in your coalition. So, you know, whether it's your social media, it might be articles in the newspaper, it might be presentation at school. You know, think about the variety of times or the number of times you can offer that invitation through various mechanisms. Because sometimes we may ignore a billboard, but we might read an article in a newspaper or vice versa. So there are opportunities to use all of the different types of media that you do. You know, if you're thinking about how do I run an awareness campaign, this is the same basic methods you need to do for that. Think about all of the variety of media you can use to engage different youth. I also want to really encourage you to have youth invite other youth. So this is, you know, that peer-to-peer interaction, and those relationships are just so important to our teens. And they're really excited when maybe somebody that they look up to or that they have something in common with invites them to be involved in something that's as important as the work that we're doing in our coalition work. So really empower your youth to think of other youth that they could invite to become involved. And in that respect, it's important that that the youth areas that we have or the youth programming that we do is inclusive, not exclusive, so that it doesn't become an insider club mentality where only certain types of kids are welcome to be there. You know, think about how some kids might be kind of on the fringes or on the edge or at risk, and find ways to get in touch with those kids as well, so that you can build a more broad-based youth coalition for the work that you're doing. And I spoke earlier about thinking about how to find kids or recruiting volunteers based on things that they might be good at. So if we think about recruiting for skills, not just for age, you know, if you want to think about how to find kids that are good at the kinds of work that you're going to be doing, you might need to think outside the box a little bit. So kids can tell you which kids are the ones who are super outspoken in class. And those might be the ones that you recruit to be maybe in your speakers bureau. The kids who do theater tech are kids who know how to build and design things. So if you're thinking about installing signs, you know, think about inviting some of those kids with that design or construction background to be involved. So think about the skills, not just the age. Of course, partnering with other organizations can be a really huge one. So, you know, whatever kinds of groups are active in your local community, think about, you know, whether it's 4-H or a Key Club. You know, locally here we have the FFA, your local churches or civic groups. Those are places where there's a couple of things you can do with this. One is you may partner with them on an intervention. Two is that you might see somebody who's really knocking it out of the park in terms of how many youth are involved with their organization. And you know what? Invite that leader out for coffee and say, I'd love to hear how this has worked for you. What, where does your success come from in this? And what have you learned along the way that might be helpful to us as we're building our youth coalition, or we're trying to increase engagement with our youth as we're doing our work. The other thing that you can do then is, if you get invited to speak at a civic organization, you're doing a presentation for the Rotary Luncheon, for example, make sure you're taking some of your youth members along with you, and not just to have them kind of be token youth representatives, but really have them be engaged with doing the presentation. Because you know what, a lot of those folks in those organizations have teenagers at home, or no teenagers through their family or neighborhood relationships, and they might be able to recommend your coalition as a place where that teen could get involved to make a difference. We talk all the time about our relationships with our school districts, and that's where you're going to find the majority of kids. Don't forget about your private and parochial schools as well. They're looking for opportunities to have their kids develop leadership skills and do meaningful community service beyond the walls of the schools. So if you haven't started that relationship with your private and parochial schools in your community, this would be a great way to get started. Calling the principal or the board president and saying, I'd just love to talk to you about this work we're doing and how teens or youth in your school could be a part of making some meaningful, lasting change in the community. So that's a quick overview of some recruiting best practices. I've seen this work in organizations that I've been involved in. So now, I'd love to hear from you. So what has worked well for you in youth recruitment? And I would just invite you to share. Either you can type some things in the chat, or if you wanted to unmute and share with your voice for the rest of the group, that would be great as well. So just pause for a minute and see who might want to share some of their good success stories.
You guys, it's Kelly. Don't make me call on you, the ones I know who are doing good stuff.
Yeah, Kelly's threatening to call on people.
This is Chris Rankin, and I'm in Southeast Iowa. And in the past, we've had a DFC grant. And one, we had 2 really great youth workers that worked with the kids. But 2, we had a really good relationship with our public school. Part of that being they are our fiscal agent, and we had an office in their building in the high school. But we were able to partner with them and actually speak to the students the first day of school during orientation times. And I think that really helped us be able to draw the kids in. And we used to have up to 100 kids a year that participated in our youth coalition. And it was really active. This past year, we don't have our DFC anymore. And our staffing has changed as well. But we had a really good showing with our middle school students, but we're struggling with our high school students now, retaining them, because we don't have as many funds to offer the trips and things like that they can go on. So, but in the past, that partnership with the school has really been important for us.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for sharing that. I think the other thing that you started off saying is that you had people who were designated to work with youth. So these are people who have some specific skill sets and competencies around knowing how to talk to teens and how to bring out the best and really keep them engaged and involved. So so think about that for the rest of you in your setting. Do we have those folks who are culturally competent or who have had specific training on working with youth to invite them into the work. And Chris, we will talk a little bit later about some alternative ideas for retention and sustainability when we maybe don't have funds to be able to pay for things that might be attractive to some of our teens, particularly like leadership institutes, that sort of thing. So thanks for bringing that up. And then we did also have in the the chat, we had some folks share some ideas as well. So setting up tables during a lunch period. Yeah, I love that idea, Tommy. Thank you for sharing that. Is go where the kids already are. And there are times when we can create new events and work on attracting people to come to those to find out about us. But it's just as easy for us, hopefully, to figure out where they are and then just go there to meet them where they're at. You know, even if we don't have huge numbers as a result of that, it's probably going to be about the same as if you tried to attract them into some new event that they had to go out of their way to get to. And then we talked about developing a PSA. So finding ways to broadcast. We talked about varying your methods. So running a public service announcement at the local movie theater, great idea of raising awareness about opportunities for youth to be involved in your efforts and how to recruit them into your efforts. So, so I have another question for you, which is basically, do you have other questions about recruitment? Anything around how to find or what methods to use that we didn't answer so far? You can either share those in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask those out loud. The chat will be available throughout the conversation process. So if something comes up for you later where you think, oh, I should have asked, you know, something, then certainly feel free to type that into the chat and we'll try to answer that as we can. So Colleen asked, how do you balance the volunteers that need to meet during the day and the students who can't meet at those times? So great question. You know, is it possible to hold maybe one or a quarterly meeting at a time that's maybe neutral for everybody? So it's a early evening meeting. And, you know, that way we can get students after school, we can get our adult volunteers who may be rushing off to other meetings or need to get home and make dinner. So yeah, think about what will work in your context. I know that there are also, for some teens, they're able to have permission to leave school during the day for meetings, depending on their school district policies around volunteerism. So that's something that you could actually have a conversation with your school district to say, hey, you know, this isn't just they're skipping school and, you know, they're missing things, but we're helping them to build life skills and leadership skills, and this is going to make them better overall citizens. So, you know, can they get out once a month for a morning meeting or a lunchtime meeting? And just there's nothing to lose by just having that conversation with your school district or you know, your private parochial schools to see what is it that they might be willing to let the kids out to do. I know our local high school, kids who are involved in theater or choir will often be able to miss morning classes if they're going off to do a concert for, you know, like we had a local prayer breakfast and the singing group at the high school sang that morning. So they all, you know, got to school a couple hours late. And that was a permitted absence because it was seen as them being involved in the community, and it was a way for the students to then also learn the skill of balancing and prioritizing. So just in the same way that we have to balance, prioritize all of our activities, one way that teens can learn to do that kind of in a safe environment is to have that opportunity to say, all right, if I miss an hour of school to attend this meeting, how do I make sure I have everything covered? How do I make sure I find out what I missed in school? So this can be another way that maybe you can talk to the school district about building life skills by inviting them to participate during the school day. But do also think about having meetings at neutral times. And Debbie asked about permission slips. Yeah, it's a great idea to make sure that you have some standard permission slips that outline what they will and won't be able to do, if there are legal parameters around that. And good idea as well to make sure that you have some sort of media release involved in that, so that if you're doing pictures, if you're doing any kind of promotion after an intervention or some sort of coalition work that would have a picture of that youth, that their parent or guardian has released permission to publish that, whether it's in your brochure, your annual report, or on social media. Parents are pretty sensitive to that in general about where their kids' pictures should and shouldn't be. So you want to make sure you include that as well. Yeah, love that. Working in youth centers to engage at-risk kids. So thinking outside the box, where are you finding your kids? Let's go where some of our kids already are. And then that after school, so that it still might be during the regular workday. So your working adults could still, attend as a workday meeting, but it's, early enough that right after school that kids could perhaps come right then. So great questions and great examples. Thank you everyone who's sharing in the chat. That's really helpful. All right, so we talked about recruitment. So let's talk about engagement. So some core principles of youth engagement. We have research that shows us that our youth who are engaged really have these three core strengths. They have capacity. So they know why they're involved. They're learning leadership. They're getting to exercise leadership. And they're participating with real action skills. So the motivation comes from understanding what's going on in the community and how it is that their work is actually addressing some of those root causes and those systems with real strategies for change. Think about your logic model. This is exactly where the rubber hits the road for this. It's knowing what's going on, your local conditions, and figuring out strategies to address those so that change can occur. And when that happens, then that helps all of us, whether we're youth or adults, develop that sense of responsibility, of ownership of the process, and making sure that youth have opportunity to act on their passions. I said it earlier, I'll probably say it a couple more times. We can't just have youth being warm bodies. They can't just be chair fillers. They have to be able to really act on the things that they care about, that develop and use skills, and then generate change through relevant, sustained action. So, these are core principles of youth engagement, but I would honestly say a lot of this applies to our adult volunteers as well. So if we think about how do we continually build engagement and capacity in our coalition overall, these are things that we should be doing anyway. So we're not talking about doing extra work necessarily to make sure these things happen. It's just remembering to include our youth members as we're thinking about building capacity in our organization. So let's dive into a couple of ideas for addressing building these things in our coalition. So capacity, motivation, opportunity, this is all about engagement. How do we keep going on with this? So first, I'd suggest providing that same training that you do with your adult volunteers. If you're doing a leadership development workshop for your coalition, absolutely do that for your youth volunteers as well. Talk about leadership styles, talk about adaptive leadership. That can be eye-opening for kids to figure out that there are different ways of being a leader. They may have some pretty set in stone ideas that, a leader is somebody who stands in front of a room and tells you what to do, and then you follow. So, opening up to them some new ideas about what a leader is and what that looks like would be a really huge way to motivate and build capacity. So talk about the SPIF, tell them what this is. Talk to them about 7 strategies for community change. They need to know all of those environmental and individual interventions that can be done to make a difference in the community. And you can host a training session for your youth with ECS. If we're coming out to do some work with your coalition, why not schedule us for an hour to work with your youth or your combined youth and adults on one of these topics or on something particular that you're really trying to build in your coalition? We also mentioned, of course, that there are national level types of training. So the CADCA has a national leadership model for youth. There's the National Youth Leadership Coalition. Scouts have both national level and also oftentimes your local scout councils will offer leadership development training for youth as well. There's a group called Youth to Leaders, another one called Growing Leaders. And I also love this Youth Empowered for Leadership and Learning, or YEL. And we have a link that we'll send out later to their training handbook. So there are really lots and lots of resources available, whether it's something you're going to send your youth to, like one of these national level programs, or finding a local curriculum or somebody who can conduct curriculum that's available at no charge, like the YEL curriculum. So I see, let's see, had something pop up in the chat here. Webinars tailored to youth that we could provide, that we could bring them in on. I would say that all of our webinars are rated PG-13, and there's really no reason why they couldn't see what we've already offered. Now, in terms of using maybe some examples or things tailored more toward youth experience, I don't think that we have done that necessarily specifically, although I am still fairly new. So I might defer to Kelly to address that question. I don't know, Kelly, can you speak to that at all?
We haven't done any youth tailored webinars in the past. We've done youth, on-site trainings. But that's certainly something we could look into, and we would love your input on what things you think your youth might want to participate in. But I agree with Erin that, all of our webinars about the 7 strategies or SPIF, all those sorts of things, your youth can participate in and would, be helpful for the capacity of your organization.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. That's a really, it's an intriguing sort of curriculum development idea. So I'll be chewing on that for a little while and maybe reaching back out to some of you to see if you would like to help create that, because I think it would be pretty neat. So really there are lots and lots of resources available. And so when we come back to our question time in just a minute, if there are particular resources you used that you didn't see listed here, would love to share those either in the chat or in just a little bit. So continuing the theme of engagement when we're talking about capacity, motivation, opportunity. So building skill sets on how to do tasks like environmental scans and data collection. I have OJT here for on-the-job training. So we don't necessarily have to set up a whole training system and then go out and do it. We can actually do some experiential learning to help students learn how to do an environmental scan, learn how to do data collection. So there's a great story that we know of one coalition. So this is thinking about building a skill set. So their youth members conducted an intervention by doing a cigarette butt cleanup in the park. And then while they were there, they also surveyed park goers about their tobacco use attitudes. And they then developed that all of that information into a presentation that they delivered at a community forum. And they were able to advocate for a policy then that eventually helped their parks become smoke-free in their city. So think about that, all of the different skill sets that they developed through doing that project. So it was, how do you develop this survey? How do you measure what you're seeing? How do you develop that into a report? And then, how do you translate all of that into an action that drives a real change in your community? So that kind of experiential, on-the-job training of building your skill set while doing the intervention is something that's a wonderful opportunity to build those skills in your coalition. So let's also talk about, I did mention briefly about that whole learning to balance responsibilities. So if you've got kids who are able to leave school for an hour or two to attend a meeting, attend a training, or to be a spokesperson for your coalition to share what's going on with your work in the wider community, that's an opportunity where they can learn how to balance their responsibilities in that safe way to see, how do I fit all these things into my schedule? How do I prioritize? How do I still make space for extracurriculars and fun things while still serving on this coalition? That's what all of us adult volunteers have to do as well. So this is how we're training our next generation of civic leaders. And finally, we really have to have fun. Our middle schoolers, especially, I know many of you know this if you've worked with middle schoolers, they still need time to play. So meeting time or whatever you're doing really has to have some play time built in. And depending on your group, this could be more or less structured. So it might be, if you're meeting in a facility that has a gym or a nice wide open space, they can have half an hour to go play dodgeball or something, just to kind of run around and blow off steam. Depending on which kids you have involved, and you're going to have to know your kids for this, you might need more or less structured fun activities. Nick and I were talking about working with different youth groups, and we both shared a similar example, but with different parameters. In that, when we had middle school youth groups, his group just could go run around in the gym and have fun, and the group that I was talking about had some kids who had experienced some pretty major trauma in their lives. And so when they were kind of let loose in that unstructured environment, they pushed every boundary possible, just to test to see if the adults that were there would deal with them lovingly or not so lovingly. So what wound up working better for that particular group of kids was to have structured play with some real adult guidance in it. So, a game with specific rules, so it was really clear what was available and not available. So again, you just kind of have to know your kids. Middle schoolers might need that, what we would call play time, and your high schoolers might not need so much play time, but they definitely want to have a good time, develop camaraderie, feel like they're part of something, be able to laugh. It could be a place where they can let off some steam and stress from their school day, or where they can really be real with what's going on in their lives. So with high schoolers, maybe design like a social media scavenger hunt, or maybe have a time where they could design their own memes or something like that. It would be a fun activity, but not necessarily, feel like homework. Maybe let them take over your Instagram account for the day. That would be a way that they could have fun with it, within some boundaries. All right, so those are some of our ideas for driving youth engagement, ongoing engagement with the work of your coalition. So what has worked well for you in youth engagement. If you have any examples to share, again, you could do that in the chat, or you could do that with your voice by going off of mute. All right, and Colleen just shared that in the Youth Center, we're engaging youth in peer-to-peer audio messaging to be played on the radio, and that has blossomed into additional interest by the kids and other activities. Having regular meetings at the schools, being able to pick them up and drive them to community events. Yeah, if transportation is a challenge for keeping your youth engaged, think about how it is that you can support transportation through, picking them up. And of course, you want to make sure that that you go through all of that transportation, have a transportation permission slip, and make sure you've got all of those bases covered to make sure we are protecting our kids and protecting our adult volunteers as well. All right, so I'm going to move on to retention. All right, so we've got them involved somehow for all of these various things. Oh, Debbie just asked about what are we using for recognition. That's a great question. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that in just a few moments. So we'll cover some recognition rewards in just a sec. So thanks, Debbie. So when we talk about retention, really this goes to your coalition sustainability overall. And retention are the things that we need to do so that people stick around to see the results of the work that they're doing. So couple of things I want us to think about in terms of our sustainability efforts. And the first is being able to describe what's in it for me. Now, I know that this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, so bear with me. I want to know, can you describe for any of your volunteers what is the benefit to being involved and to staying involved? Do you have an elevator speech around how it is that what somebody is going to do is going to make a difference for them personally, as well as the benefit for the community? We have a lot of different things that we could be doing, and there are many competitions for time, energy, resources. So if I'm going to get involved in something, I need to really understand what I will get out of it in addition to what my service will do for the community. So think about this. Could you make either a literal or a metaphorical, a mental scrapbook of how youth participation has contributed to community outcomes, so that they can see, wow, these 25 hours that I spent over the last couple of months working on this intervention, actually, I can trace that to a result in the community along with some of the other things that are going on, so that when they're thinking about how they made a difference, they can see a real connection between their action and an outcome. Can you describe for them, or can you list for them some of the scholarships or job opportunities that have been offered to youth who've been engaged with your work over time? Can you describe that as a benefit, basically? Because when we're thinking about how we prioritize what we're going to do, we do also have to think about, what are we going to get out of it versus what are we putting into it? That's true for everybody. That's true for how you talk to adult volunteers as well as for teenage volunteers. So we want to retain our youth volunteers by partnering with them. So what I mean by that is that their voices have a real solid role in shaping organization decisions. Both youth and adults participate in the community interventions together. So I think sometimes it's tempting. I live in a university community, and so a lot of times in community organizations, what people will say is, well, college students need volunteer hours, so we'll just get them to show up and do this stuff, which is fair enough, but that's not partnership. They're essentially doing chores on behalf of the coalition. So as you're thinking about how do I work with youth, really test your ideas and test yourself to say, is this a meaningful work? Is this meaningful work for them? Is there something that's going to happen as a result of their activity that could only happen because they're involved with this? Because they brought their energy, their ideas, and their resources to bear. They really have a stake in the outcomes that we all want to achieve. So treating them as if they are people who will benefit or be harmed if things don't change, helps to help us all be motivated to really treat them as partners. So things that you could do is, they might be on the agenda to deliver a report. Well, actually, maybe invite that youth person in to help you sit down and write the agenda. That's how we get to this sort of meaningful engagement focused structure, so that we're not just having them to show up to complete tasks that someone else has chosen, but they're maybe running their own meetings. And this could be no matter how you have your coalition structured. So you may have, a handful or one or two youth members of your full coalition. Or you might have a subcommittee that's dedicated to working with youth. Or you could have a standalone committee that's a youth version of the other adult coalition, and it's sort of a side-by-side connected, but also somewhat independent. All of those structures are valid models. So, however it works best in your local context is the one that you should use. And, you might want to think about if you've tried one model of engaging youth and it just doesn't seem to be working, like they're there for a little while, but then they're gone after a bit. Maybe your whatever model you've chosen to keep them engaged isn't going to work to sustain that, to keep them involved. So think about, can we restructure how we have youth involved in the coalition? I want to make sure we are also always keeping in mind the logic model. The temptation for all of us is that sometimes we can get distracted by either a new issue that arises in the community, or that the kids might see something else going on and they're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could also do this? So my example for this is when I was the advisor for the Campus Red Cross Club. They worked on doing safety training for their peers, as well as assisting with the blood drives. But the thing that would often get them the most excited was doing the dance marathon on campus. And I used to kind of push back on that and say, it's great if you want to get a group together and participate in this, but that's not really why you were organized. You were organized to do this specific work around safety and blood drives. And so that needs to really take up the bulk of your time and attention. So refer back to your logic model. What is it that you're working on? Why are you working on that specifically? And what are the interventions that you can do to help them see their part in how they're using that information to do their community actions. We talked about recognition and reward. So there are a couple of different things, low cost to no cost to, of course, there's high cost things as well. So think about how people like to be rewarded or recognized. We don't all like the same things, for one thing. So, there are some people who would love to be on a stage with a spotlight, recognized at a dinner or a community forum. And there are other people who absolutely loathe the spotlight and do not want that kind of recognition, but they love certificates, or they love to see their name in the paper. So, a letter to the editor of your local paper, social media recognition, volunteer of the month kind of thing could be something that you could do to recognize your youth contributions. Again, remember that if you're publishing names and photos, you want to have that media release on hand so that you have permission to do photo releases if that's part of it. Make sure that students know that you are more than happy to write those letters of recommendation for jobs or for college applications, because that's something that they need. It's valuable. It doesn't cost anything. It just costs you a little bit of time to be able to really speak to why that student should be considered for admission to a job, an internship, or to a college program. Some of you mentioned you had previously had budget that allowed you to fund student trips to national conventions or leadership training. So if you have those funds, awesome, do that. Students love that. They get to meet peers from across the country, start developing relationships, and really start thinking about how they can do this work for the rest of their lives. If your budget doesn't allow for that, maybe there's a way to do your own local version of that. So think about, if we're offering this leadership training, would other local regional coalitions like to send their teens to an event that we put on? You could then have your teens work in organizing that as like a mini retreat or a conference to work with their peers maybe on a local level instead of that national level. So they could think about what kind of speakers would we want to bring in and what kinds of activities would we want to do. So I think that opportunity to do a local convention as opposed to a national one is a way that they could have an approximate experience of that to do that. So you can also partner with your local businesses to see if they'd be willing to donate gift cards to hand out as easy rewards, things like a Dairy Queen or the local burger joint. Think about what the kids might want, and then and see if there are places that might develop or give you gift cards for that kind of thing. There are some online rewards program that you may earn things like Amazon gift cards or things over time. So if you have those that you have earned through another rewards sharing program, that's something that you could give out as well. So I'm going to pause talking here for just a moment and see if anyone has anything that they wanted to share about what might have worked well for you in retaining youth in your coalition. So again, feel free to share either in the chat or you can unmute and. All right, great. So Kristen was sharing that developing resources that they need but that they may not have access to is one really great way of helping to retain and providing them opportunities for them to see their work highlighted and shared outside of maybe an area that they may not have already been able to share. So we had a couple of also things shared in the group chat. So partnering with Philadelphia to be able to send youth to the NYLI training, great. Having a coalition member step up to donate money for scholarships for your seniors. So yeah, maybe tying scholarship funds into long-term involvement. So kids see, I know this has been challenging for me to make time in my schedule, but because I did that and I was involved for a certain length of time, I'm now eligible to apply for a scholarship. So it's not necessarily holding those hostage, but rather, saying that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a reward down here. And Tommy said, having the co-creation atmosphere where all voices are heard has proven to be instrumental. That is an awesome segue into my next slide, which is, hopefully you can see this. We have this available on our member portal on the website as well. So Jessica will put the link for that in the chat, and you can get to that and look at it as well. We have a continuum, really, of how it is that we can choose to interact with youth. I think this is true of volunteers in general, but I think really highlighting this in terms of how we work with youth is critical, because oftentimes we look at youth as evaluation objects. So they take a survey, but they didn't actually help craft the survey. They didn't have a voice in when or how the survey would be administered. So if we move along the continuum and think about youth as resources, or really ideally as partners, that's a shared responsibility. It's having our youth sit down with our adults and talk about, what makes for a good community evaluation survey. How do we write questions that really capture the essence of what we want to know, and that are, reliable and valid questions that are good survey instruments, and that we're asking, when would be the best time? What are the things that kids really care about, and what are the things that adults really care about, and how can we find some commonalities on that so that we can partner in our work to improve our community, to see the change that we want to see. So really encourage you to think about where you're at in this continuum. So it may be that you're at that youth as object, and you just need to tweak things a little bit to move to the recipients column, or maybe depending on the activity or the intervention you're talking about, you have different spots along the way for this continuum to think about how it is that you're interacting with your youth. So I'd really highly encourage you to check this out on our member portal. The link is there in the chat. Thank you, Jess. And you can print this off, have it as a discussion at your next meeting in terms of how do we think about how youth are involved in our group. And it might be really fascinating to have this conversation with your youth as well as with your adults, to say, how do you feel treated? And what kinds of things are we doing to treat you either as an object or as a partner? And let's talk together about how we can maybe flip that script and make some changes to really engage with youth as true partners, not just as warm bodies or as objects of our evaluation techniques. So, oh my gosh, we're coming up to the end of the hour. I wanted to just thank you all so much for everything that you've shared, and just think for a moment, what's next for you? So what does success look like for you in terms of youth engagement? Think about what that really looks like. How can you build on your existing strengths to get to that next level of youth engagement? And then you have to think about, just like in your logic model, just like in all of your other coalition work, what action steps do you need to take to get there? Who do you need to be involved to make it happen? Make a plan for youth engagement. It won't happen by accident. It won't happen unless you really put some specific intentional efforts into it. And of course, we, ECS, is always here to help you think through how we can help you better engage and build capacity in your coalition. We'd love to be a partner with you in that. So always, think about that, reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do to help you along that journey. So our purpose today was to address your questions. I hope we've done that. I wonder if there's anything else that's really burning for you that we have not yet addressed. If so, please feel free to ask that question out loud or in the chat. Tommy says, what are some tips on engaging youth with their extremely busy schedules? So many clubs, so many commitments already in place. It is really difficult to get students to a quick 30-minute meeting. Yeah, it is. And this is, I think, going back to that recruiting, it might be, thinking about recruiting kids who aren't as busy. So it may be finding ways to involve youth who aren't already involved in something, rather than trying to get our kids who are really overburdened to add one more thing into their schedule. Think about what the purpose of that meeting is as well. So are there things that they can do in advance of the meeting, like read something or complete something, so that you don't need to spend meeting time doing something that they could do outside of meeting time? And that way, the time that they do spend with you is maximized. It's the most efficient thing that they could do because they're there. One of the things I like to say just in general about meetings is that meeting time is sacred time. Only spend your meeting time doing things that you can only do because you're all literally there together. So that's your brainstorming time, or that's your conversation time, as opposed to let's reread meeting minutes, or let's do something we could have done outside of this. And I think making sure that parents understand when and how meetings are happening too. I know this current generation of kids has a pretty overprogrammed life, and as a parent of a teenager, I guess I'll have to own up to that. But helping parents be involved in the scheduling aspect might help them to find that time. Or, we talked about going where the kids already are is a way to partner with something that's going on, tag something on to the end or the beginning of another meeting they might be involved in. Yeah, Colleen, you shared that going outside of the usual kids, the kids who are on student council and every other thing, they might not have the capacity to add this. Or the other thing is, maybe what's more attractive about this than other things they could be doing with their time. So if you're offering something that they really can't get anywhere else, that might be a way of having them prioritize your activity over something else. So if they're really seeing real community change out of their actions, if they've got a brand new skill set that they wouldn't have had otherwise because they've been involved with you, I think that's one of the really key ways that you can get them to commit to you as maybe a top 5 as opposed to, a bottom 12 activity.